With 6 premierships, an endless list of legends, and being the richest valued club in the NRL, sitting at a valuation of $124 million at the end of 2024, the Brisbane Broncos are more than just a team. They're the richest, most powerful institution in the NRL. So how did they rise from nothing in 1988 to the powerhouse we know today? This is the entire history of the Brisbane Broncos. So let's start at the beginning, when the main footy competition was the New South Wales Rugby League, and they were looking to expand beyond Sydney in the 1980s. Brisbane was looking like the golden prize, a rugby league heartland with over 1 million people, and no top-tier team to call their own. The Brisbane Rugby League had been the strongest competition outside of Sydney for decades, producing legends like Wally Lewis, but the city's best players were consistently poached by Sydney clubs. But at the same time Rugby League was looking to expand, the threat of rival codes was growing fast. When the new AFL team, the Brisbane Bears, now known as the Brisbane Lions, arrived in 1987, the Rugby League establishment knew it had to move fast. And just 1 year later in 1988, the Brisbane Broncos would be launched by visionary Queensland sportsmen and entrepreneurs, Paul Morgan, Barry Maranta, Gary Borkin, and Stephen Williams as the main players. The Brisbane Broncos would rewrite the rules on how rugby league clubs would operate. But what made their approach so different? Unlike the Sydney clubs, which heavily depended on pokie machines and league club bars, the Broncos founders asked a daring question: why not build a club that stands on its own? Their answer would disrupt the entire code. An independent, profit-driven powerhouse, fueled by not pokies, but by the crowd, and Queensland corporate dollars. The Broncos' early moves were jaw-dropping. Before they even played a game, Maranta and Morgan pulled off a massive deal, a $1 million a year sponsorship deal with Power Brewing, which was unheard of in Australian sport at the time. All the locals were buzzing, but that was just the start. What would happen when these high rollers brought Queensland's footy legends like Wally Lewis, Alan Langer, and Supercoach Wayne Bennett on board? Well, let's look at their debut match. It wasn't just a sporting event, it was a party and a business launch. The park was overflowing, and the opening day was engineered as a statement. This was rugby league as entertainment and commerce, an event for both the masses and the boardroom. The Broncos won that historic game, 44-10, defeating the defending premiers, the Manly Sea Eagles, with Wally Lewis kicking 6 goals and controlling the match like the master he was. The crowd was treated to everything they'd hoped for. The Broncos founders weren't just content in chasing premierships, they wanted to change the business of the game itself. In May 1989, just a year after playing their first match, the Broncos became the only club to float on the Australian Securities Exchange, the ASX. This wasn't just a first in rugby league. It made the Broncos the first and only publicly listed sporting club in all of Australia. But why take this bold step? Well, because it forced the club to embrace corporate transparency, high-level governance, and open its doors to outside investors. This was about thinking bigger. The early 1990s were the Broncos' golden era. In 1992, they reached their first grand final. It was a brutal, grinded game, but the Broncos would come out on top, winning the game 28-8, giving them their first premiership. But the success didn't just end there. They backed it up in 1993, with another win over the Dragons. In just a few short years, Brisbane were back-to-back premiers, and already one of the wealthiest clubs in the game. But with money comes power, and in 1997, power nearly tore the game apart. The Broncos, who were tired of Sydney's control of rugby league, aligned with Rupert Murdoch during the infamous Super League War. Here's a brief overview of the Super League War. Before the NRL existed, there was the ARL competition, which was the main rugby league competition in Australia, consisting of 20 teams in 1996. But in 1997, famous Australian businessman Rupert Murdoch wanted to start his own competition called the Super League, taking some of the clubs from the ARL, splitting rugby league in Australia in half. The Broncos became one of the flagship teams in the Super League in 97, winning the premiership over Cronulla. And after a single season that the Super League ran, both separate leagues were combined and formed the NRL as we know it today. When the game reunited in 1998, Brisbane didn't waste any time, thrashing the Bulldogs to take home another premiership. But it didn't stop there, and on the brink of the new millennia, they won the competition again. By the early 2000s, Brisbane were a dynasty. More premierships in 2000 and 2006 cemented their status. Darren Lockyer became the face of the franchise, while Shane Webke, Petro Civoniceva, and Gordon Tallis gave them firepower up front. That 2006 triumph would prove to be Wayne Bennett's last premiership with the Broncos. After 21 seasons and 6 premierships, Bennett left the club in 2008, following disagreements with management. Bennett's departure marked the end of an era. He'd been more than just a coach. He'd been the architect of the Brisbane culture, and the man who turned them from expansion team to rugby league royalty. Finding a replacement was going to be difficult. Ivan Henjak took over in 2009, followed by Anthony Griffin in 2011, but they never could replicate the magic of Bennett's years. The Broncos remained competitive, but couldn't get over the line in the big games. Even when the premiership slowed, the Broncos' finances never did. While most Sydney teams struggled to get crowds of 12,000, crowds of 30,000 at Suncorp were normal. Corporate sponsors including banks, airlines and major brands all wanted a piece of the Broncos, but money doesn't guarantee success. The Broncos still made finals most years after losing their supercoach, and even produced star players like Sam Thaiday, Justin Hodges and Corey Parker, but couldn't regain that title. In 2015, Wayne Bennett nearly pulled off a fairy tale, returning to the club and coaching the side to another grand final appearance, this time against the Cowboys. This game turned out to be one of the greatest games ever played. The Broncos were leading with seconds to go, but a try in the corner took the game to extra time, and Brisbane would lose to Jonathan Thurston's golden point field goal. It was heartbreak for the Brisbane Broncos. They would continue to play consistent finals footy over the next few seasons, but the darkest chapter came in 2020, with Anthony Seibold coaching the side, and for the first time ever, the Broncos finished last place on the ladder, a wooden spoon for the richest club in the NRL. Fans were furious, sponsors were uneasy, and even though the club was still printing money, the football side was in crisis. The wooden spoon season was a wake-up call. The Broncos had lost their way. The culture that Bennett had built over 2 decades had gradually eroded, replaced by a sense of entitlement and a lack of accountability. But the club knew they needed to make a drastic change, so they brought in a new head coach, Kevin Walters, a Broncos legend from the playing days. He was brought in as coach in 2021, with a mandate to restore the club's pride and culture. It was a very popular decision. Walters had been a part of 5 premiership teams as a player and understood what the Broncos were all about. Under their new coach, the Broncos set about rebuilding. Young stars like Payne Haas, Ezra Mam and Reece Walsh gave fans hope. Financially, Brisbane never really dropped. The 2020 saw COVID-19 gutting sports clubs' finances everywhere, but the Broncos pivoted. They ramped up digital fan engagement, helping with the club's popularity, and now have the largest online following of any NRL club. But their growth wasn't just online. As the club was rebuilding, from 2021, their memberships nearly doubled, going from 28,000 to over 61,000 by the end of 2024. That number's almost double the amount of members any other team has. But their next growth phase would be on the field. By 2023, the Broncos were back. Their rebuild was officially complete, and they had a star roster, which finished second on the ladder at the end of the season. Suncorp became prime entertainment, with the Broncos routinely averaging close to 40,000 fans per match. Everything was looking so good for the club, but that would come to an end in the grand final. Nathan Cleary produced one of the greatest comebacks in NRL history, denying the Broncos of their 7th premiership. The club was determined to bring their form into the next season, but they couldn't, and finished 12th on the ladder. But it wasn't all bad news, especially financially. By 2024, Broncos commercial partnerships had soared, with prestige brands like Kia, NRMA, and ASICS on board. Now let's look at some financial numbers. In 2024, the club's revenue smashed $81 million, a jaw-dropping 75% increase since 2017. Memberships and game day tickets made up $27 million. NRL grants made up $21 million, sponsorships $15 million, community programs close to $10 million, merchandise was $4.5 million, and other sources making up the remainder of the money. Even after hefty expenses, profits remained strong, totaling to $5.2 million in 2024. The Broncos' position is unmatched. They're still the only NRL club listed on the stock exchange. They dominate TV ratings. They average the highest crowd in the competition, and their sponsorship portfolio is stacked with blue chip brands. And they are without a doubt the richest NRL club. And at the time of this recording, they just secured a preliminary final spot, making them one game away from another grand final appearance. So will the Broncos be able to take the grand final this year, increasing their value even further? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.